in any case, and it's
Yeah.
7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So students, take your seat. And good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is the second in a series of classes on relationships in the Bible. We seem to be having some technical difficulties, and if you also are, who happen to be watching this, email mark@truthunity.net. I think he's probably home by now and may have access to his computer. If you wish to call in, at 8 o'clock, I open up the discussion and we'll take any questions or comments for you who are able to hear this broadcast. And so, as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes, become still, and center yourselves in that living, loving presence of God, in the silence of your being. One power, one presence, one life, one mind, and we are one with that one. And for a few moments in the silence, let us acknowledge that we carry with us that one source of infinite possibilities, of infinite good, infinite resources of healing energy, abundance, guidance for every moment, substance for every need. All possibilities in the silence. one source. I am one with the source of infinite good. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. And as we now return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have free and open access to that source of infinite good. And we do give thanks in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ presence that lives within us all. Amen. All right. Last week, and I know that many of you did not get to hear last week's technology. And so I would like to do a review. I'll take about 5-10 minutes to do a review of last week, where we talked about our primary relationship, which is with the Creator. We start out, before we incarnate, in a state of oneness, and our journey through life is to return to that state of conscious oneness. So we go from oneness to oneness, but it's a consciousness of oneness that allows us to live that oneness as the basis for life. So, our primary relationship is with God. If we are established in that relationship, everything else is in order. Yes. Everything else is in order. If things are not in order, what does Jesus say? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything else will be added. If things are not in order within us, they are not going to be in order outside of us, and it has an effect on all of our relationships. So, order or chaos, it's a choice we make. And last week we talked about God's idea to incarnate in human form. Why would infinite intelligence decide to compress itself down and go into a limited form? Quite simply because God wants to replicate him, her, itself through us so as to bring heaven out onto earth. We are replicas of God. God made the image likeness, and we are here to fulfill God's desire to think and act as the Christ. That image likeness is the perfect pattern, the Christ, that it's within us. And so that Christ becomes our standard. And we have to ask ourselves, does everything that we think, do all the decisions we make, are all the attitudes that we hold in accord with that standard? Okay. That's not a rhetorical question. That is something that helps keep us on track. So the whole first chapter of Genesis, which is what we talked about last week, is about involution. Involution means the image likeness and everything necessary, like everything compacted into a seed that is implanted within us. And within that seed are all the laws and the principles and the faculties, everything necessary to bring that seed into the fulfillment of itself. Just as an acorn contains everything necessary for the oak tree, the seed is the oak tree in potential form. And so too, we are the Christ in potential form. Each day of creation we talked about was a very orderly step of unfoldment in the development of consciousness, in the development of that idea, but it's only ideas. God only creates ideas. God does not act directly on human affairs. God creates ideas and then turns those ideas over to the co-creator. So those ideas get fleshed out and then manifested through us. Here's a quote from Myrtle. She said, "It is our purpose in being here to become conscious of and to express the true pattern and qualities of Father-Mother." And Emily Cady, "It is the purpose for which we came into the world, that we might grow step by step, as we are doing, to the place in consciousness where we could bear the full flow of divine energy." In other words, we have to develop the nervous system, the hardware here, to the point where we can accommodate that full flow of divine energy. And so on the sixth day, and here's where our lesson really picks up tonight, the sixth day, image likeness was created. Male and female created he them. Every individual is male and female. God is male and female. Image likeness is male and female. We all have, no matter if we're men or women, we all have male energy and we all have female energy. Male represents the thinking, intellect, conscious, active. The female energy represents the feeling, the intuitive, the relational, the more passive. And those two have to grow together back into oneness. When we're born, the male and female become, so we become two as we're born into physicality. And then it's quite a journey to get the thinking and the feeling into a harmonious relationship. It's our journey because that is what opens the way for the Christ to come through. Yes?
I just realized the importance of through us. I mean, God's idea is to express, because if we don't know that, then I think we expect it to happen to us or for us.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, if we know the truth, it can only happen through us.
I was going to this place anyway, but where we visit that state of oneness is in meditation, in the silence, And in that moment, or moments, the two become one. Elohim, which is the name for God in Genesis 1, male singular and feminine plural. Very interesting. So within the word itself is male, female, singular, plural, everything. All right? God is the all in all. And then we get to the co-creator, in Genesis 2, and we have Jehovah, Elohim Jehovah, the image likeness. And we see this God also, male and female, contained within the name. That's the Lord of the Old Testament is the Christ of the New, forming and shaping, like a potter forming and shaping clay. God has the ideas. We're born into an already created world. Everything, every infinite divine ideas, all possible forms, all possible actions and interactions, already created. All the laws, all the principles. And so we, as our thinking nature, we lay hold of an idea, and then if it's the heart energy, it's the female energy that propels that idea into manifestation. In the second chapter of Genesis, the Lord God Jehovah is the word Lord God Jehovah means that the male-female principle is like continuous self-revelation. In this second chapter of Genesis, it's that point right before an idea, an abstract idea, becomes concrete form. It's like you have an idea, any idea. I want to start a business. And then you kind of take count here and you say, here's what it's going to be. Here's what the business is about. And you flesh it out a little bit. But that's still closer to the idea than it is to its manifestation, because you have to engage all the other energies to actually manifest it. And so you can't just have a thought, I want to have a business, because if the heart says, I don't think so, not a good idea, I'm not going with you, then it's not going to produce offspring.
So
it takes male and female thoughts and feelings to have a manifestation. Okay.
So in the beginning, Elohim, and when the spirit, the feminine energy, moved over the face of the water,
yes,
and came into an agreement, then there was the creative activity.
That's right. So right in the beginning, you have that trinity: mind, idea, expression. All right. Right away. And you can see there's no clear kind of dividing line between the material and the spiritual. There's just this point that is usually called the still point, or I've heard it called the gap. And it's there where we form and shape, in the substance of the mind. And what was Adam made out of? Dust, or in some translation, clods, clods of dirt.
Yeah, people say clay now.
Yeah. And then substance and spirit, breath of life. So breath into the substance, you breathe inspiration into that idea, and that's the feminine energy, the Holy Spirit.
So the transition, because there is a transition, but they're not But like the transition from 19 to 20, to me, it's felt.
Yeah, you're right.
It's felt.
Right.
If you don't feel it, you don't know it. But if you feel it, it's really obvious.
Well, yes. But here's how that forms and shapes. It's a gradual process, but you're not even aware of it. So the I am presence, the Christ of you, lays hold of that idea, and then the idea, if it's a powerful idea, it gathers substance to it, and it becomes so concentrated in substance that it manifests.
So the female is the attracting power.
Yes, right. The love energy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Adam represents thinking nature, Eve, our feeling nature. Now, first, we're talking about Adam and Eve as ideas in the mind of God, just as each of us is a point of awareness in the mind of God. So the Garden of Eden is in the East. That means within. Code word in metaphysics for within. All right, so that garden of infinite possibilities, infinite good, everything good. God did not create anything that was not good. And that is within us in the silence at the center of our being. In between the Tigris and Euphrates. All right, the cradle of civilization, right? The Fertile Crescent, it was called. All right, and that's, and you can look up the names in your Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. But in the center of the garden, the tree of life.
It's like the rivers are arms of embrace.
Yeah. That's cold, cold, cold. Yeah, and the tree of life. Okay, that is the source of eternal life. And then, in the center of the garden, is also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Notice that it's not the tree of good and evil, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because God did not create anything evil. But we are born, when we are born into physicality, we're born into a world of opposites, and we see good and evil. And for a good many years of our lives, we make judgments on the basis of appearance, and we say that's good and that's evil, and this person is smart and this person is dumb, and on and on. We make these judgments from a limited perspective of reality. Whereas God called everything good. But to have that perspective, you have to go and experience in the center of your being how God sees. And then, once that perspective, and you say, aha, then your notion of God changes, your notion of yourself changes, your notion of your relationship between you and God, and your relationship with everything else in life. It's like God goes from being this superhuman being, made in our image and likeness. God's like us, only huge, to a oneness, a sense of I and the Father are one. All right. So that the God presence is within us. And we go from this sense of I'm only flesh and thoughts, flesh, blood, and thoughts, to, I am a spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God. This is, it's not like this happens like in one flash, but this is what happens. It's such a dramatic shift. And then the environment, what is our relationship to the environment? Well, we go from feeling that the environment victimizes us to, oh my, I'm accountable because I've created this environment through my thoughts and feelings that are either in harmony or not.
So in the material mirror, I just see myself, but in the mirror, the still point, I see that I am.
Yes, exactly. So now the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, when God tells Adam, not to eat of the fruit, because if you do, you will surely die. All right. Well, the serpent says you don't die. So is that true? Do you die? Well, yes and no. Okay. You do open yourself up to the possibility of mortality in the physical world, do you not? And in order to get back to the tree of life, you have to die to human consciousness. But from a human perspective, just because you're physical, are you going to die because you eat the forbidden fruit? Well, not immediately anyway. Or not die in the sense that you think. So, but what we die to is that sense of connection with the Creator. It's by necessity. So what is called the fall of man in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, it's not a moral depravity at all. It's a necessity for intelligence has to notch itself down to the point where it is not going to destroy a delicate human nervous system. The nervous system then has to be developed and cultivated until it can expand to that point of being expanded enough to contain the flow of divine energy through it. We do it gradually, day by day, as we visit the silence within us. We build up reserves. We build the momentum which each time you die to the old world and you are born into a new world because you have a more expanded perspective of it. Okay, so those two trees in the middle of the garden. And so by necessity, it's not a fall in the sense of, what can I say, devolving. It's that step that is necessary in order to evolve back to the consciousness of oneness. So the fall is up, not down. And so what's the role of the serpent? I find this fascinating because the poor snake has gotten such a bad rap. Whereas how is God going to get Adam and Eve out of paradise? If you were in paradise, would you want to leave?
No.
No. So the serpent serves as God's desire, saying, get out of here. You're on your own now. You have your command. Go be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Okay. So the serpent represents desire. The serpent represents worldly wisdom, that desire to go out and to expand and to grow and to explore. It's an ancient symbol of worldly wisdom. Now, what are the consequences? I tell you the consequences, we all experience those consequences. All right? pain in childbirth. All right? Isn't that what? It's not painful to give birth to an idea in the absolute, but to give birth to a human baby, it requires labor. And how about work? Do you need to work? Out here, there's no tree of life that you can just grab a hold of the fruit. Well, there is within you, but if you're not aware of it, then for all practical purposes, it's not there. So, yes, physical life is very different, but we are here to remember to wake up to that oneness that is still there. And once we have the memory, and once we wake up, we can't pretend that it's not there anymore. So we are destined to take the journey, and we can try and resist, but it won't work, and it will just cause you more pain.
So normally people have it upside down.
Yeah.
In that, in order for life to be existential, you have to leave the garden of the abstract. You just do.
Yeah.
Or life never becomes existential. It never becomes reality.
Exactly. And so what if you continue to say, I want this business. I really want to start this business. I really want to start this business. And 25 years later, you're saying, I really want to start this business. Okay. It's an idea that you have, but it has no energy behind it to propel it into visible expression.
It's like 2:4 to 3:19 is like writing a business plan. And then getting behind all the pieces and assigning tasks and then going out and executing those so that it becomes reality.
Exactly. And for you out there, he's referring to 2:4 of Genesis to 3:24 of Genesis, and that is the passage in the Bible where the idea is getting fleshed out. We're putting flesh on the bones of it so that it's all ready to go. And then into manifestation they go. So that's Adam and Eve as ideas in the mind of God, because this is part of our incarnation process. Then Adam and Eve, they get skins, all right? They get skins, meaning they're born. And then we have Adam and Eve as the primal couple, all right? They're married, and they have 2 sons. Oh, and one of those sons kills the other. All right. This is pretty much what we try to do. That when we're in a really human consciousness, we think we can kill out any spiritual ideas, but we can't. And so the enmity between the brothers, one a keeper of sheep, and the other a tiller of the ground. Okay, so here we have duality. All right. Spiritual and physical, that sense of separation. And here the human is dominant, and it seems to overtake the spiritual. But it doesn't happen because compensation, Seth is born to replace Abel, and Cain goes off as a wanderer and a fugitive. And sometimes we feel as confused as Cain. We'll talk more about Cain and Abel when we get to brothers next week, but sometimes there is that sense of confusion, and we end up being wanderers, fugitives, but we will always be brought back to the starting point.
So it's almost like we have to exile the Cain within us, accept the compensation, and move on.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We have to exile the Cain within ourselves. Yes. Okay, so Adam and Eve, then, as the primal couple, obviously they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and so here they have two sons that reflect that duality. All right. Interesting. Then when we get a little farther along, we get to history, which starts in Genesis 12. This is a patriarch. Abraham, as far as we know, was an actual person. Abraham, although he was called Abram, and he and Sarah, we can look at this husband and wife and see how far evolution has taken this notion of male and female. Now, Abraham's father, by name of Terah, had the impulse to go to the promised land. His name, Terah, means loiterer. If we delay in making a decision, procrastination, all right, we die. He dies in Haran, and Abraham continues on to the promised land. And so Abraham represents that first impulse of faith. Remember, on the second day of creation, faith is the bridge between spirit and matter. So first, faith. Abraham represents an immature state of faith, but it's a glimmer. And so I have suggested that anyone who's interested, but particularly for those who are doing the 2-year class, to track Abraham's journey and see where his faith wavers. Our faith wavers. We're not always like, oh, I have faith in God. Sometimes we have faith in our own ideas more than in God. Sometimes we have more faith in our own sense of what is right, and so on. So Abraham, he goes to Canaan just like he was supposed to. Canaan, the promised land. And he sees a famine. And he says, oh, whoops, he falls back into default and says, there's a famine here, I'm going to Egypt. Egypt is kind of a strange place, but Egypt represents prosperity, plenty. And so he takes Sarah and they go to Egypt, and he's thinking he might gain favor with Pharaoh, but he thinks he better pass off Sarah as his sister because she's very beautiful. And as his wife, Pharaoh could have him killed in order to take her. Well, that's not a very good mark in the area of faith. And as a result, all kinds of plagues come upon Pharaoh, and it gets Abraham kicked out of Egypt. Now, so he's got one good mark and two not so good marks so far. But on the way home with Lot, Lot is a kind of negative faith. That part of us that says, oh, well, this looks better than that, so I'm going to take this. Abraham offers Lot the first choice of what land he wants. And by appearance, it looks like Lot has made the better choice. You know, he gets to choose first. He gets all the flat land, all the grazing. But then Abraham goes up on a hill, raised consciousness, and God says, you can have all the land you can perceive. All the land you can see is yours. And isn't that true of us? that we can have all the good that we can conceive of. Eric Butterworth has this formula where he says C plus B equals A. Anything you can conceive of in mind, believe you can have, you will receive. So conceive, believe, and receive.
So what's the difference between that, what Eric Butterworth just said, and Lot seeing and using the Genesis words, what is a delight to the eyes and good for food? What's the difference? Why isn't that?
Well, Lot and Abraham are part of the same consciousness. So there's a part of us that likes to choose by appearance, but as we grow in faith, then we see beyond the appearance. Faith is the perceiving power of the mind that sees beyond the appearance to a different dimension of reality. So sometimes Lot is predominant within us, and sometimes Abraham is.
So the lesson might be taking the Genesis 3 story and the stories of these patriarchs, realize that just because it's a delight to the eyes, just because it looks good for food, just because it looks like it might make you wise, to keep looking beyond to what?
Always keep looking. Whenever you see someone go up on a hill or a mountain, that means he goes up to a higher level of perception.
So be sure that you always see those
things
from
that perspective.
From a higher perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Just keep taking it one higher perspective and see if it still looks like that.
Okay, so here's what happens. Now here again, we see him defaulting back into human consciousness. Actually, it's he and Sarah together, because God promises them a son. All right. And so there's this sort of doubt that can happen. I mean, after all, 80 years old and, not a likely thing.
100.
Yeah, or something like that. And so she, not trusting in the promise, gives Hagar, her handmaiden, an Egyptian, to be with Abraham. And so they have a son, Ishmael, who becomes the founder of Islam. Okay, he is kicked out. There's all kinds of disorder because Abraham and Sarah, their relationship was not in tune with the divine. They did not trust in the promise. Particularly Sarai. Her name was Sarai. Abraham's name was Abram. When Abraham receives the covenant, he remembers that promise that God made. And as a result of that remembrance that we all have a covenant with God, then he gets a name change. Abraham. So it goes from Abram to Abraham, that spiritual breath. All right, so an expansion of consciousness in Sarai, meaning bitterness. She was bitter and contentious. And her name is changed to Sarah. Again, that expansion of spirit within her. So that's a result of the faculty of faith in its very beginning form. And so Isaac, the child that God promised means laughter and joy. Laughter and joy. And so Ishmael goes off and is a wanderer, pretty much like Cain. All right, going to the New Testament, and by the way, you can go do any couples you want. I think Ahab and Jezebel would be a wonderful one in the Old Testament. And that's
like an Ananias and Sapphira.
Oh, we'll get to Ananias and Sapphira, but because each story that, for right now, it's moving closer and closer to that harmonious marriage that has to take place within us if we want to have harmony in a marriage or in any relationship outside of ourselves. So, taking one from the New Testament, let's see, how are we doing? Okay, we've still got some time. This is from Luke, chapter 1, verses 5 to 25. This is the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah. Together, they represent the whole consciousness of thought and feeling on the spiritual plane. But here's the thing. Zechariah is a priest. He is in the temple, and he receives a revelation that he and Elizabeth are going to have a son. Now, because he doubts, he is struck dumb, and he is not allowed to speak that revelation. And it's not until John the Baptist is actually born, and they have to give him a little board in which to write down what the child is to be named. And because he says John, his voice is restored. So we lose our voice, we lose our spiritual voice if we don't listen to that revelation that is continually coming in to us from inside.
Wow.
This is a sidebar, but I think it was a kind of revelation to me that I feel in many ways that for a long time I had lost my voice. But I went to a singing class. It was a singing class. And this woman was an opera singer. This was not to learn to sing, but it was to learn how to breathe from the inside, to give this incredible power to your voice. And when she simply sang a note, it was in a room smaller than the living room, and you wanted to jump out of it. It was so strong. So breath comes from within. We think we take in air from the outside, but in reality, we breathe from the inside. And we have to expire. We have to let out the breath in order to get that power. I mean, that to me was a revelation. I haven't mastered it yet, but I think about it.
But you know, that helps me in that. For instance, when we have these lessons, or whenever we meditate together, and then you bring us out of the meditation, I swear to God, that the vibration of your voice from me being in a still point just resonates through my whole being. And so I can see where communion with the silence, with the source, can give us a resonance that gives our voice power.
It is, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's where Zechariah was. He was at the right hand. He was at that point of communion. The altar of incense. Okay, the altar of incense. And frankincense, that is essential oils.
Ooh, yeah.
Where faith is, it's in the pineal gland. And here he was standing on the right.
And even in all of that.
And on the right side of the altar of incense. So he was receptive to the divine idea, and yet he doubted. Okay, so it's kind of like we get a hit and we say, I'm not sure that would work. Was that really guidance or wasn't it? We've all had moments of doubt about things that we think might have been guidance, but sometimes it's just annoying that something is right.
We all do it now.
And so at that point of communion, he doubted, and so the disbelief was what took his voice. All right, and then he got it back. Now, John the Baptist was the predecessor. He pointed the way to the Christ. And you remember what happened to John the Baptist. He represented the intellect, but an illumined intellect, because he saw the higher power. He saw that he was there to prepare the way for the Christ. We start on an intellectual level. And most of us are still, at least to some degree, in human consciousness, but we know that the Christ is there and we're moving in that direction. So if we compare this couple to the perfectly harmonious couple, Mary and Joseph, then we get a sense of the fulfillment of Adam and Eve. So we have Mary. It's Mary who has the revelation, right? The angel comes to Mary in this very quiet state and says, "Oh, you're going to have this baby." And it's like she's somewhat troubled by that. And the angel says, "Do not fear." And her response was, "Let it be done unto me as you have said. Let Spirit completely come over me as you have said. I am the handmaiden of the Lord." And so then she tells Joseph, and Joseph says, wait a minute here. This doesn't sound right. But he has a dream and says, believe her. She's pure. Don't put her away privily. I think that's such a funny expression. And from that point on, male and female, not only are they harmonious, but the intuitive is on lead, and the intellect or understanding is a servant to that intuition. So male and female harmonious, but in right relationship. And that has to be within us too. Wonder if the streaming is coming through at all. Where we see in the Gospel of John, it's a complete parallel to the first chapter of Genesis. And there we see the perfect marriage. Okay, the marriage at Cana. the marriage between thinking and feeling. And it comes at the point of surrendering to the Christ. It's almost done. All right.
So in Luke, she says, whatever. And then in John, at the wedding feast of Cana, she says, do whatever.
Well, no, this is now from the point, Jesus is born, all right? Okay, Jesus has been warned. We are awakened to our Christ nature. Now, what is the first sign of our awakening to that Christ nature? It's this wedding at Cana, all right? The perception that life is running out. The wine is running out. And I love this story because everybody knows what a disaster that is to the hospitable people of that time. Wine running out. I mean, you'll have a reputation as a bad host forever. And these weddings went on for 7 days. And the men on one side, and they're all lined up and according to their social status and their economic status. Each one offering wine in return. And they're probably so drunk at this point that they're not aware that the wine is running out. But we are always aware of when our energy is low, when the life is running out of us. And so Mary turns to Jesus and she says, do something about this. Okay, and it's like, have you ever told, you see a need and then you call on God and you say, fix this, please. And Jesus says, it's not my time. When is it Jesus' time? When all the impulses in consciousness have turned over. You know, it's not our timing. It's the timing, the right timing of the Christ. So as soon as Mary goes to the servants and says, do whatever he says, then Jesus goes immediately and turns the water into wine. What does Jesus do? He only speaks the word. He says, fill the jars with water. Okay? The jars are like the cells. They're like battery cells. All right? They're like the cells of our body. Fill the jars with water. All right? What makes batteries run? Water. Okay. Pour out the water. Right. Pour some out. And that's life. The best wine that ever was, that spiritual life. It's a wonderful story. Love that story of the marriage at Cana. But that's how it is. There's the groom, the conscious intellect, thinking mind, and the subconscious feeling mind, which you don't see. That's why there's no bride in the story. And there has to be that marriage so that when the feeling nature says, time to turn things over to the Christ, time for renewal, time for spiritual life.
So, taking the allegory and putting myself in the place of the disciples where I get to see all of this. So I see the situation of the lack, and I see the situation of the surrender, and I see the situation of the Christ overcome. Then I can believe as the disciple.
Okay. But at this point, it says Mary was the one who was invited. And Jesus, P.S., Jesus was there also with his disciples. So it's here that Jesus rises to the consciousness of the Christ. All those impulses of the feeling nature saying, you are in charge. Yeah, so that's how it happens. So the marriage takes place, revitalization happens, and that's the opening for the Christ, this marriage between thinking and feeling. We also have in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira. So here we've gone from Abraham, immature faith, to a whole community based on faith. It's like a commune with Peter in charge. Now, Peter has a kind of a track record before the resurrection. Peter has a track record pretty much like Abraham, vowing undying love to Jesus and then denying him 3 times, running away from the crucifixion, pretending like he never even knew him. Okay, and that's kind of like our faith too. And here, Peter is in charge of this faith community. And there's a couple there by name of Ananias and Sapphira. Now here's a case where the feminine and the masculine are in cahoots. And with an ego agenda.
Cahoots versus harmony.
Yes. They are totally together in their desire, in their ego desire for recognition. Isn't that one of those human desires, to be in public recognized for your good deed? And as you recall, in the previous passage, there was a man named Barnabas who had sold all of his property and donated the proceeds and put it at the feet of Peter for this community. And he got great recognition for that. And Ananias thought, I think I want that too. And so he, with the knowledge of Sapphira, they sold their property and donated some of it to the community and held back a little, kind of their ace in the hole, their little mad money or whatever. And so there was no need for them to do that. They were not required to do that, but they thought they did it for the wrong reason. And you can't hide that kind of motive from your faith faculty. You can't hide it. And so, they are confronted immediately with, you thought you could really conceal this? And instantly, the thinking, Ananias dies. And when she comes in 3 hours later, she dies too. But they're dying completely cleansed of that old state of consciousness. Completely cleansed. So that's a story of, how a couple where thinking and feeling are together with an ego agenda instead of with a spiritual agenda. Well, it is after 8 o'clock. If anyone is watching or listening, I would greatly appreciate to know if you, first of all, are able to hear it, and second of all, if you have any comments or questions. And if anybody, I hope, if you had any technical difficulties, you would have emailed Mark at truthunity.net. There are plenty of other couples that you could look at. There's Rachel and Jacob, Leah and Jacob, and you can compare those two marriages and the kind of children they produced. All right? It's a difference.
You can't help but notice, and I admit we never talked about this. So the wedding feast of Cana starts on the third day, and then fire comes in after 3 hours.
Yes.
John's making a statement here, right?
Sure. It's the Trinity that brings into manifestation. So the third aspect of the Trinity is spirit. Okay, we have mind, idea, expression. Third day.
So there's going to be a definite expression of something.
Okay, so it's not
in this story because it's been signified by the three.
Well, first, Ananias. First, the thought has to be. It's the thought that has to be. Oh, a dean. Oh. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Are you watching?
I'm listening. Yes, I'm listening to you.
Okay.
This is very odd. Yes. I'll go back. Are you on delay or something?
Am I what?
On delay.
No.
Okay.
Oh, she can't see the video?
I'm going to hang up. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, good. Okay.
So anyway, okay, goodbye.
So the video's not been working.
No, Dean. Yes, the Dean. There I am.
Yes. I know. I know who you are. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Okay, all right. I'm hanging up now.
Okay.
But I want you to know that you're fuzzy, but I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Still messed up.
Yeah. And I emailed people today to say that everything was fixed.
Oh.
Sorry, guys. We'll try again next week. So there are plenty of couples in the Bible. If you want to look at the relationship between the male and the female energy, where on the spectrum are you? What predominates in you? And quite often, men are high in the intuitive, just as women are sometimes high on the intellect.
You got that? Is that reversed?
Yes, I'm saying that we are all on this spectrum of male-female energy. And in some of us, regardless of whether we are a man or a woman. Oh, Bob Conrad. Hi, Bob.
Oh, hi, Eleanor.
Hi. Can you hear anything or see anything?
I'm trying to turn you off on my computer. Hold on.
Yeah.
There. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Mark said there was some difficulty, but it appears to be streaming. It's just that the picture looks weird to me.
Yeah, but I had trouble getting on for the first 15 minutes, and I emailed Mark, and he gave me another website to get on, and I used that, and I get on. But I was ready to close it down because I didn't get either sound nor picture. So, but I have you, and so I came in late. I have a question. I'm watching the progression of the relationships of male and female, and it's come to my thinking that could we say that even in the first and second chapter of Genesis, that we could say that Elohim is the feeling nature and Jehovah is the thinking nature, because Jehovah brings the manifestation of form, and Elohim is creating the spiritual self. We're born and made into the image and likeness of. So I'm thinking, because you have this whole pattern of relationships and thinking and feeling nature, and maybe I'm going off the deep end with this, but for me, though, I could see that relationship between Jehovah consciousness and Elohim with the feeling and thinking nature with the masculine and feminine.
Okay, well, here was at least the way I was understanding it, that with both Elohim and Jehovah, the male and female were one, according to the meaning of their names. But when we get to Genesis 2, in order for God to fulfill his desire to incarnate, the male and female have to become separate. And the co-creator then turns it, the co-creator is like the draftsman who is fleshing out the plans and saying, it's not going to work because in physicality, we have to be born as men or women. We have to be born male or female. But within each person is not only the oneness that we have to wake up to, but a spectrum of thinking and feeling on which we are predominant. And so what I was saying just now is that even though men are predominantly intellect, some men have a high level of intuition and feeling, and the opposite with women who are generally representing the intuitive and the feeling nature. Sometimes they are very intellectual and analytical and like that. So I see it as starting out as one. The one becomes two, and then the journey of the two becomes one consciously as we evolve.
But when we experience that still point experience in the silence, isn't there a merging of the masculine and the feminine, and it becomes one?
Yes.
So the Jehovah consciousness and the Elohim consciousness come together as one.
Yes.
Yes.
It's in meditation that oneness takes place. But it's not until we're actually established there and living from that place that we're able to maintain that awareness of our oneness. And so we default back into duality. We default back into human consciousness, just like Abraham did and like Peter did and like the disciples big time did. It's like we're all on that path. And like you said, the still point, I read that earlier, that passage in T.S. Eliot, where consciousness comes to that still point, and right there is where there's no movement in consciousness at all. And then that plunge, that's where the male and female are one. That's the marriage of Cana. But then if you dip into the silence, which is deeper, that's one with all that is.
Can I step into this conversation with Bob?
We can say, though, that Jesus Jesus in his consciousness reached that point, that still point, I'm just using it as an example, and so he was a complete, there was a complete merging of the masculine and feminine, because, and the one thought that comes to my mind is when the woman touched his garment, and he from his thinking nature, he recognized that, but yet because of the electrical energy around him that went out into around him, and when she touched the garment, touching that pure consciousness, that's when the healing took place.
Yes. Oh, it was, Jesus, Jesus was involved in talking to someone else when that actually happened. There's really two incidents going on there. And when she, you know, her history was that she had tried everything. She'd been to all these doctors and taken all these drugs, and she was still, and life was still draining out of her. It was like 12 years of hemorrhaging, all right, life running out. And so she had this sense that if she could touch the hem of the garment, that's like even touching his energy field, that she could be healed. And that's why he said, your faith has made you healed. That faith is taking a step into the unknown, because she was risking her life. Because in Judaism, if you are bleeding, she was committing a great sin according to Leviticus. But she stepped out in faith. She went beyond the letter of the law and touched his garment. And on the hem of the garment is embroidered this prayer of, you know, the prayer that Greg used to teach us, and I'm trying to think of what its name is now. But yeah, it's powerful. It's like that consciousness. As you expand in consciousness, it goes out and becomes not only a protective place for you, but it touches anyone who has the faith to enter.
I think we see in all these discussions that there's more than one thing going on. There can be more than one, and sometimes that's expressed in male, female feeling, thinking. Sometimes it's expressed like the woman with the bleeding thing. Purely, it's about faith, and sometimes it's about process. I see Elohim and Jehovah as more about process, from idea to expression, from the majesty of God to the identification, the I am, being reflected.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, can you hear what Chuck is saying?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, and sometimes, you see, the first thing after we have this notion of male and female, it's that faith has to develop. Faith, the seed of faith, Charles Fillmore says, is in the pineal gland, which is the emotional center of the brain. It's intuition. That's where faith, and if you can touch that, that's why essential oils are so vital, a part of that culture, is that they knew that it developed the intuitive nature where revelation comes from. And so, going with that. And so it's not just about the thinking and the feeling, it's about the process of bringing the right relationship between the thinking and the feeling. The intuition always has to be on lead. And the thinking has to be the servant. The intellect has to be the servant of the intuition. And when you have relationships where the thinking just simply is always overriding the intuition, the offspring of that, you have a Cain and an Abel situation. Do you see?
Or Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira, they share an agenda, whereas Cain and Abel are reflecting the dual nature of Adam and Eve, their parents.
Or the thinking without being in harmony with the community.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Bob.
But if we look at it collectively, and at that time it was a very male-oriented society, as we see today even in the Middle East, it's a very strong male-oriented society. The woman is there, the feminine is there to serve the masculine.
Yeah, they've got it backwards. Bob?
And so at that time, and we can look at the Middle East, what's going on now, but at that time when Jesus was walking
Absolutely. With Jesus, Jesus was living the image likeness. So there was male and female completely balanced within him. Yes, he hung out with women and sinners and all, tax collectors and Pharisees and Jesus, when we become the Christ, when we become the image likeness, and you see how it develops. It starts with faith. It starts with the marriage at Cana, and then the next step is, once you have surrendered to that Christ, you can heal. And
not only can, but to me, like once Mary, of course, recognizes the Christ and knows something can happen, and this bleeding woman knows that if she just touches him, she can be healed. And so, I mean, faith is like it's a knowing. It's a convinced. It's not even. It's almost not even faith. They just know it.
Well, that's what faith is. It's a knowing.
Yeah.
But as far as the healing goes, that's from the faculty of imagination, that Jesus could image the wholeness no matter what the difficulty of the person appeared to be. And so he, it was the official's son, which was the second sign of the Messiah in the Gospel of John. And it also turned out that he had faith, but all Jesus had to do was to image the wholeness of that person, that son, and he was healed. And then it progresses from there. In my mind, each of the signs is becoming. They happen in a certain order, in the order of difficulty. And finally we get to Lazarus, Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb when he's already died. That's what prepares him for resurrection himself. But each step of the way, but it starts with faith. And there's a lot of healing incidents that are, that Jesus is able to make that connecting point with the person on the basis of their faith. It's what bridges.
And when someone comes to us for prayer and healing, as they did with Myrtle and Charles, the only thing you do recognize is that we recognize that I or Myrtle or Charles cannot heal, but what you do is you recognize and align yourself with that perfect, pure self in you, the Christ in you, and then in the other person, and then you allow yourselves to step into that magnificent realm of perfect peace, perfect joy, and the healing takes place. So, and as Jesus said so often, it's not I, why call me good? It's the Father, the source within.
The Father within that does the work. That's absolutely right. We used to see that.
That was the key to Myrtle working with people in her healing ministry, and Charles too.
Absolutely.
That they did.
There is no ego in healing, or it's not healing. It's very true.
Well, thank you. I'm going to hang up. Let someone else call in.
Thanks a lot, Bob. Appreciate the call.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You want to say something?
Oh, no, it was all very interesting. I did want to mention that you mentioned something about Ishmael. Muslims would say that Muhammad was the one that introduced, Islam, but many Arab Muslims would trace their lineage to Ishmael. So just a clarification about that.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that conversation with Bob kind of helped to reveal a process that if we believe an image above the circumstance and face it in with my Christ in oneness with the source, then whatever needs to be made so will be made so.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this concludes the formal part of this evening's lesson. Next week we're going to talk about brothers. And we'll see how the time goes. There's lots of brothers. That's a wonderful story. And then we'll move on to sisters after that. And then we'll move on to friends. It's very interesting to see, but all relationships depend upon the strength of the primary relationship of oneness with God. And so as we bring this time to a close, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. And again, recognize that the source of infinite good is within. It is our feeling nature, our intuitive nature, that is able to comprehend the big picture. And it is revealed for our thinking nature to say, yes, I will serve this. And so for an awareness of that truth, we do give thanks in the name of the Christ. Amen. And so I thank you for those of you who were able to watch this evening. I'll continue to work with Mark until we get this technical difficulty cleared up. Thanks to all who were able to at least partake in some of this. So maybe it's the streaming company. We're not sure at this point. But I thank you all. Thank you for the live people. I always enjoy a live class, so if any of you feel inclined to come, thank you, Adine, for calling in. And with that, I will wish you a very good night. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.